Welcome to Let's Talk About It. Broadcasting live from North Nashville, Tennessee. North Nashville spans from Metro Center down to the border of Bicentennial Mall, including the neighborhoods of Bordeaux, Buena Vista, Parkwood Estates, Germantown, Haynes Manor, Jefferson Street, Fisk Park, Cumberland Gardens, Oak Valley, Enchanted Hill, and many others. It's perhaps best known for the 3 universities housed here, including Tennessee State University, Fisk University, and Meharry Medical College. North Nashville is also home to the Tennessee Titans practice facility. The Tennessee Titans will begin construction on an expansion project at St. Thomas Sports Park, which will almost double its current footprint in Nashville's Metro Center neighborhood. The plan includes 60,000 square feet in additions, including a new building situated along one of the practice fields, and major renovation of spaces within the existing 75,000 square foot building.
Now live from North Nashville, Dr. William Head. Let's talk about it.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Let's Talk About It on NorthNashvilleTV.com, the voice of the voiceless. Today we have the privilege to talk with Mr. Albert Bender, a Native American and a great statesman and spokesman for his, I hate to use your people, but the indigenous people of this country. Al, it is nice to be with you on this beautiful day in Cumberland Park. Tell us about the efforts that your organization is making in the Nashville area to get done what the Native Americans want to get done.
Well, I'd first like to start with what we are trying to do, and when I say we, it's the Indigenous Peoples Coalition. We are on a campaign to preserve and bring further recognition to the history of the Nashville, Middle Tennessee area, and our campaign to do this currently is to change the name of Cumberland Park to Wasioto Park. And Wasioto Park is the original name of the Cumberland River. And we are on a campaign that brought it to the attention of the Parks, Metro Parks Board, and we are engaged in negotiations with the Metro Parks Board to have this officially confirmed by the Parks Board. And to go back a little further, in the 1670s and 1680s, this river that is now called the Cumberland River, again was referred to the Wasioto River by the Shawnee people who lived along the river during that particular period of time. And when I say Wasioto River, that is the original name of the Cumberland River. It was only changed to the name of the Cumberland River by a white explorer in 1758 who incorrectly and did not have the authority to change the name of the river. But he did so, and even for years after that, it was still referred to as the River of the Shawnees. So we want to bring this fact back to the people of Nashville and have Wasioto Park with the original, what was the original name of the Cumberland River, Wasioto River.
One of the aspects of American history that is truly damning and indicative of the hatred that has developed in this country for people who assisted the colonists in staying alive their first cold winter, for them to turn around and stab them in the back. But as you said previously, there were a great number of Native Americans in this country before Europeans came. give us an indication, as you did a moment ago, of the numbers and how they have dwindled over the centuries.
Well, when the European colonizers first invaded this country, there were 60 million, it's estimated, 60 million indigenous people, 60 million Native Americans inhabiting what is now the United States. But because of the genocide that was brought to bear, the horrific massacres, the European diseases that were inflicted upon indigenous people, the taking of land, because of all these troubles and disasters that were visited upon indigenous people, by the year 1900, the indigenous population had dwindled, had resulted in only 237,196 indigenous people still existed by the year 1900.
As out of 60?
Out of 60 million. This is to say that this was one of the greatest, if not the most extensive genocide in the history of the world.
It is completely without any previous previous action as close to that anywhere, as you said, in the world. The Jewish population claimed the Jewish apocalypse, the all of the things that have happened to black folks through slavery. I don't think any of those measure up to what the Native American has experienced at the hands of the Europeans.
Exactly. And that, again, is one of the greatest holocausts, one of the greatest genocides, if not the greatest genocide in the history of the world. And to give you an example, right here in the Middle Tennessee area, when, or shortly before European colonizers arrived, the Middle Tennessee area had a population, an estimated population of 1 million indigenous people, which made the Middle Tennessee area have the largest Native American population in the entire Southeast.
And now there are a handful of them.
Yes, there are a handful, but we, I would like to say, exert an influence far greater than our numbers because of the fact that we are the first people of this land, and we are a very outspoken people, and when need be, we are a very militant people. We will not have our voices not heard. Our voices will be heard, and our voices will be heard in terms of changing the name of Cumberland Park to Wasiota Park as a part of our campaign to preserve and bring greater recognition to the indigenous history of the Nashville, Middle Tennessee area.
The Wasiota Park?
Wasiota Park.
Is, you say that was the name of the now Cumberland River.
Yes.
Previously, before it was changed by the invading Europeans.
Yes.
As you think back on the historical significance of this area having 1 million Native Americans, now down to a handful, it blows my mind. And I'm a black man. Obviously, Native Americans are just completely angry about this. What is the heritage that your people, pardon the use of the your people, what is the heritage of the Native American from all of this?
Well, I would say bringing recognition up to date, we have to look at the fact that this Middle Tennessee area was a part of the historic land of the Cherokee Nation. And I'm a Cherokee, and I have to hearken back to the fact that we did not take colonization without bringing about, without putting forth maximum resistance on the part of the native people, Cherokee people, to stop the European invasion, to slow down the European usurpation of our lands. And I have to refer back to, historically speaking, the Cherokee War of 1776 to 1794, and bring forth the fact that the Cherokee War and wars were the largest, were the longest Native American, the longest indigenous wars in the history of the United States. So again, we did not meekly leave our lands. We fought tooth and nail. We fought heroically to stop the European dispossession of our lands by our people.
I was at one time at my wit's end as to why Andrew Jackson was such a butthead about the Native American population, and I now know the reason. Because there were so many Native Americans living in Middle Tennessee, you had a political advantage, if you could call it that, because you probably had as many citizens or more than the white citizenry at that point.
Yes, that is very true. Our populations were so numerous and so determined to maintain ourselves in our own lands that, again, resistance, and I'll put it like this, military resistance, continued all throughout the 18th century. And Andrew Jackson wanted to dispossess indigenous peoples of their land, and that included not just Cherokees, but included Cherokees, Choctaws, Chickasaws, Seminoles, and Muskogee Creeks, because they wanted the rich lands of the South to be held by white settlers for the profit and prosperity of the white settlers, for the profit of the large land speculation companies who made millions upon millions of dollars from the dispossession of native people by the European invasion.
We're sitting in what was once Native American land. As I look, I don't see any representation of Native Americans, even accidentally, sitting here. Your existence as a people has been almost eradicated in this part of the country. Well, the whole country, except where Native Americans still thrive. What is your feeling on that?
Well, I feel that our campaign to change the name of Cumberland Park to Wasiota Park is not a campaign in a vacuum. It's part of a larger nationwide campaign that's being conducted by indigenous peoples throughout the United States for the renaming of public spaces, of public parks, of rivers and the like, to their original Native American names. And it's all a part of our campaign to bring greater recognition to the existence of Native Americans and to bring about greater recognition of the fact that we are still here and will be here forever.
And I'm right with you on that one. The efforts by state legislatures to eradicate or rewrite or simply lie about American history is an effort to cleanse the European of what the predecessors of today did. And now we're back to the point where, just like here in Nashville, all the people rolling into town and all the folks being pushed out to the outskirts. Native Americans were pushed cross country to another state. Your basic view of the Trail of Tears is?
Well, my basic view of the Trail of Tears is that it was more than just a trail of tears. It was a trail of genocide. It was a tale of ethnic cleansing. And it was a trail to virtually wipe out Native Americans from the areas of the South that they had inhabited and existed upon for thousands of years. Again, it was a unheralded, incomparable genocide that has to be brought to the attention of the larger American public in order to reverse, again, I would say reverse, and bring greater recognition and greater awareness of the fact that this not just was our land, but still is our land, and it was land that was illegally taken. And in other parts of the country, Native peoples are filing lawsuits for the return of the lands that were illegally taken. So we are still fighting on. Instead of fighting on the battlefield, we're fighting in the courtrooms now.
I have noted the Native Americans in the Northwest, in the Dakotas and out that way, who are now pressing for the return of their land. They've won a monetary award for what has been done to them, but they refuse the monetary reward, saying that they want their land back. Your position on that?
Well, to clarify that, you're referring to the Black Hills in the Dakotas.
Right.
And as a result of legal cases that were filed, the courts awarded the Lakota peoples, who are otherwise known as the Sioux peoples, millions upon millions of dollars as compensation for the taking of the Black Hills, which are sacred to the Lakota people. But to this day, to this very day, all the Lakota people have refused to accept those millions upon millions of dollars, and they continue to request, they continue to insist, they continue to demand the return of the Black Hills to the Lakota peoples, and continue to disdainfully refuse to accept any money as adequate compensation for the taking of the Black Hills, which was taken illegally in the latter 19th century by the U.S. government. And the courts have in fact confirmed that the land was taken illegally. That's why the courts made the multi-million-dollar award to the Lakota people. But again, the Lakota people in the Dakotas, North and South Dakota, have refused to accept the money.
Well, I think it is admirable that they have refused, and I think it is even more admirable that none of the Lakota people are taking anything. There's nobody sneaking around the edges trying to subvert what they're trying to do. And I'm sure if they did, they would probably be somewhere they couldn't be found. But as you consider the I don't want to use the word unfortunate, because it has nothing to do with fortune. It has to do with greed, avarice. I look at the situation with Israel and their opponents. Israel is firing missiles. The Palestinians are throwing rocks. During the wars between Native Americans and the U.S. government, the U.S. government had guns and rifles and bullets, cannons. The Native American had whatever they made to fight with. So they were driven off the land by a group that was better supplied, not a group that had any claim to what belonged to them. As you look and remember as you've grown up, what were the feelings of the Cherokee toward being pushed all the way to Oklahoma?
Well, there was, of course, the feeling of intense bitterness, a feeling of intense wrongdoing. And there is a Cherokee prophecy that before the end of the world, that all Cherokees will return to the original homeland. And I would also like to harken back to what you said about indigenous people being defeated by superior weaponry. That is true in a way and not true in a way. We weren't defeated militarily. We were defeated by diseases. It was because of the demographic change that took place. If we had been able to maintain our numbers, Europeans still would not be possessing our lands. There's one way of putting it, as one historian put it years and years ago. Native Americans were outnumbered and also suffered from not having superior weapons, but being outnumbered, outgunned, but rarely outfought. And again, we do not regard ourselves as being militarily defeated. We regard ourselves as being defeated by the heinous
smallpox,
measles, diphtheria,
gonorrhea, syphilis.
Yes, syphilis, malaria, all the diseases that the Europeans brought from across the ocean decimated our numbers. If our numbers had not been decimated, this land would still be in the possession of indigenous people.
The Europeans were the first to use, what do they call it?
Biological warfare. Yes, that's very correct.
The soldiers at the various forts gave the Native Americans blankets that people with smallpox had slept on and died under, that gave them, the Native Americans, smallpox, to which they had absolutely no defense.
Yes.
So they talk about the use of biological warfare. That's not new. It's been done, but it's been done to someone other than white folks. How, you were just talking about how that decimated your numbers. And then every time they won a skirmish, whether it was all women and children with no defense or fighting people who could fight back, they called it a great victory. And every time Native Americans won a victory, it was an act of terrorism.
A massacre.
A massacre, yes, sir. Tell me your feelings on how history has treated the Native Americans.
Well, history has largely distorted Native American history, in the sense, again, as you referenced, the fact that whenever we won a great victory, it was referred to as a massacre. Whenever we were massacred by the European colonizers, it was referred to as a great victory. But again, we have to look at the history of this country and how we have been left out of the history books for the most part, and then when we have been put into the history books, we have been put in there in a very distorted version. And also I'd like to mention the fact that in reference to what is happening in the Middle East is a situation of where Israel is massacring indigenous people. And I will speak in terms of the general feeling of indigenous people in this country toward the conflict in the Middle East, is that we have a feeling of deep, deep solidarity with the Palestinians, because we realize that in the 21st century what is happening to them is largely what happened to us in the 18th, 19th, and 20th century, being subjected to massacre after massacre after massacre. And also, when you refer to smallpox blankets, and history records this, in 1762, General Amherst, who was the head of British forces in the United States, in what would to become the United States, in what was known as Pontiac's War, he instructed white people who traded wares with native people to give them smallpox blankets. And smallpox blankets took a fearful toll in Pontiac's War and were one of the reasons for the, I would not say defeat of native people in Pontiac's War, but a stalemate was reached because of smallpox blankets. And this was not the only instance of smallpox blankets being used throughout the history of the relationships between European invaders and native peoples. It happened again and again and again, and resulted in such a decimation of our numbers that a demographic change happened to the extent that we were no longer able to resist as effectively as we would have been otherwise had we maintained our numbers.
The other part of the massacre that I find so very, very detestable is that buffalo hunters killed off the source of protein of the Western Native Americans by killing buffalo by the hundreds and using nothing but their hides. And then when there was no longer a market for their hides, they just killed them and piled them up. It is such a terrible thought when you think of all these people all of a sudden, and I say all of a sudden, it's not all of a sudden, have become wary of the plight of animals. The same people who kill animals to wipe out other people are now animal lovers. I think that's me being that way. But does that not strike you as just so detestable it's ridiculous?
Yes, I think that the point you raised is a point of the hypocritical irony of the fact that the European colonizers, the Europeans who invaded what is now the United States, in the late 19th century, the U.S. government fostered, encouraged a campaign for the slaughtering of not just thousands of buffalo, but millions of buffalo, which was the livelihood of the Plains Indians nations, as a means of defeating them economically, as a means of defeating them by starvation. Because again, the U.S. Army was facing a very, very formidable foe in terms of the Plains Indians nations, and they figured it was better to deplete their source of food than to try to continue to fight them on the battlefield.
Well, I am a child of the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And all the movies that I watched, cowboy and Indian stories, I cheered for the cavalry because that was the USA. And as I have gotten older, I have become very ashamed of that fact. But I know and I realize that it was out of ignorance. But the portrayal of the Native Americans in literature, movies, visual arts have all been so skewed and completely out of character that it makes no sense whatsoever. And it keeps painting the Native American as someone who is vicious, larcenous. If in the movies they had killed a white family, they had taken a white woman, and the white woman, of course, is the epitome of who you should be protecting. How do you feel about the depiction of the Native Americans in media?
Well, I think that from the start of the depiction of Native Americans in media, starting during the early 20th century, all the way up until, I guess, I would say, the late 1970s to 1980s, there was a complete distortion of the history of the relationship between European colonizers and Native American people. The Europeans were always characterized as being innocent victims of indigenous aggression, when in fact it was the complete opposite, in that indigenous people were the complete victims of European aggression with the massacres that took place. And it was a policy of the U.S. government not just to kill Native American men, it was the policy of the U.S. government to kill Native American women and children. And this is a policy on the part of the U.S. government that has continued throughout its wars, all the way through the Vietnam War, to Afghanistan, to, again, all the wars in which the U.S. military has been engaged in. Targets have been made of women and children.
Well, we know that women are the producers of children. So to kill the population, you kill the producer. I am so very thankful for you coming out and having this conversation. And we're going to get together again and talk about some even more current things. We talked a lot of history today, and talk about your efforts to bring recognition to the Native American. If you had one last thing that you could tell our audience, what would it be?
Well, I would say this, that for those in the audience who support the naming of Cumberland Park to Wasioto Park, to be at the Parks Board meeting on November the 5th at 12 o'clock, at which time we hope to have a decision on the part of the Parks Board in favor of changing the name of Cumberland Park to Wasioto Park. And we invite all decent-minded, all justice-minded people in the Nashville, Middle Tennessee area to support our efforts for the name change again of Cumberland Park to Wasioto Park. And I thank you so much for this opportunity to express the sentiments of indigenous people on this issue and so many other issues that we've covered today.
Well, we'll be back to get some more of your interest and your efforts. This has been extremely interesting to me, being a child of the media blitz that kept people cheering for the cavalry, even youngsters who were ignorant to the fact of what really happened. Ladies and gentlemen, you have been watching Let's Talk About It, special edition on NorthNashvilleTV.com, the voice